You've seen them before a million times, in unit trains and in mixed consists. Bigger than most tank cars, but still smaller than the fabled whale belly. You may have seen sidings and spurs full of these, especially if you've ever been through an oil town like Bakersfield, California, or being stored by the hundreds like in Chehalis, Washington. A simple but must-have railcar for any modern modeler, this is a review of the Athearn Genesis, Greenbrier, and Trinity Rail 33,000-gallon tank cars in N-scale. Hello everyone, and welcome to the review of Athearn's most recent release of 33,000-gallon LPG tank cars. I saw a while back that Athearn was making these cars in various roads, and I knew I just had to have them. Apart from the fact that my collection had very few of these cars, and pretty much all of them were bought secondhand, the allure of having all new LPG tank cars was very enticing, to say the least. As you can see now by looking at my collection, I have definitely put an end to my LPG tank car shortage. The first 3 tracks on my display are full of the cars that were released from the most recent run, and yes, I got all of them. But the track in the back of the display has a few tank cars from the older runs, so I figured I'd not only do a review for the new cars, but also a side-by-side comparison with the new cars and the older cars from prior runs. The 33,000-gallon tank car is nothing new. Larger capacity tank cars have been introduced in one fashion or another since the early 1960s when Union Tank Car Leasing released their whale belly tank cars. These cars carried anywhere between 33 and 63,000 gallons. The largest tank car ever placed in regular service had a capacity of about 50,000 gallons, and this tank car was used for about 20 years before it was finally retired. As time went on, 33,000 gallons became the standard for large capacity tank cars. Today, these cars can be frequently seen carrying liquid petroleum gas, or LPG, anhydrous ammonia, and a few other propane and butane-based chemicals. Though these cars do have variations in their design, Athearn makes their cars with that in mind. These models all feature 3 different body styles, including the early, flat panel, and late styles, separately applied walkway platforms, manway, outlet, ladders, brake rigging detail, safety rail supports, tank saddles and brake wheels, photo-etched metal walkways and end platforms, wire safety rails and end handrails, printed hazmat placards where appropriate, screw-mounted 100-ton roller-bearing trucks, and machined metal wheels with RP25 contours. In addition to those, Athearn has added a couple new features to these tank cars as well, which include prototypically accurate McHenry Type E double-shelf couplers, bent wire uncoupling levers, and rubber train brake line hoses. Here's a comparison with one of the new Procore tank cars alongside a Procore tank car from a previous run. From this angle, you can see both the new brake hose as well as the double shelf coupler. The coupler is especially exciting for the rivet counters among us, as the double shelf coupler is the standard coupler for all tank cars. I may make a video essay about couplers one day, but the short version is that these couplers were designed to prevent the couplers from unlatching in a derailment and puncturing the car next to it. What makes these couplers stand out, at least to me, is that until recently, the double shelf couplers have not been made in N-scale, so hopefully this means that we'll begin to see couplers like these on tank cars made by Microtrains or Atlas as well. In this most recent run, Athearn made these cars in 6 road names, including Union Tank Car Leasing or UTLX, General American or GATX, Procore or PROX, Trinity Leasing or TILX, Chevron USA, CPDX, and Southwest Rail Industries, SRIX. A little side note about that last one, there is a misprint, so to speak, on the boxes for the SRIX cars. As I mentioned, SRIX is the reporting mark for Southwest Rail Industries. However, the boxes say Southern Illinois Railcar, whose reporting mark is SIRX, so the 2 middle letters got mixed up in their research. Rest assured, though, that the reporting marks are accurate to the prototypes they depict. These cars have been out for a while now, so pickings are pretty slim. As of the making of this review, Athearn still has all the singles and 3-packs available for $49.99 and $104.99 respectively. The only other site that has any of these tank cars currently in stock that I was able to find is Model Train Stuff, with only one GATX and one PROX 3-pack available for $94.49. Now that I've gone over prototype, detail, and pricing information, let's talk about how these models fare, especially when compared to their previous generations. On my 4-track display, the lead track has all the UTLX and GATX tank cars. The track behind that is all TILX and SRIX cars, and the third track is all CPDX and PROX. I also have a bunch of cars on my 4th track as well. These are tank cars from previous runs Athearn made, and this includes a couple 3-pack UTLX sets, and various Procore, UTLX, GBRX, and TACX singles. I'll be comparing these new cars with these older ones. Our first round of comparisons will feature UTLX tank cars. These all have the same body style with the flat panel on the center. The two in the back are from previous runs, and the one in the middle is from the Primed for Grime series. One thing I immediately noticed is that the new car doesn't have pre-printed hazmat placards or stenciling for the load it carries, so if I wanted to, I could print my own hazmat decals to apply to the car. Another thing to point out that I like about the Primed for Grime car is the dirty trucks the car sits on. That is something I wish was more common on a lot of models, as trucks are usually the first victims of the elements when they're out on the rails. The newer release doesn't make use of any weathering, but that's fine, as that means I'll be able to practice weathering myself. I can say with confidence, though, that these cars, both new and old, look fantastic and will make a great addition to a modern layout, especially in large numbers. Up next are some of the cars with extended walkways to one side. In this comparison, I have included a Procore, TILX, SRIX, and CPDX car from the newest release, and a GBRX and TACX car from one of the prior releases. One thing that immediately popped out to me is that I noticed that some of these cars, namely the CPDX, TILX, and GBRX cars, look very shiny compared to the others. I'm not sure what Athearn did differently when they made these particular tank cars, and I'm not sure that I like it. It isn't uncommon to see brand new rail cars out on the rails, especially these days, but there's a limit to how shiny and new looking a car can be before it seems less realistic. Not a major problem, as that can be remedied by my own personal attempts at weathering, but it's definitely something I've noticed. For this next bit, I do need to point out a pretty big critique. Some of the parts, like hazmat placard holders and brake lines, fell or broke off sometime between Athearn making these cars and me receiving them from Lombard Hobbies. I noticed that issue while I was opening these boxes for the first time, so I know it wasn't anything I had done. Like with most other pieces of damage on a model, this is an easy fix with a little adhesive, but I felt that since these were new in box, I felt it was worth a mention in this review. One really nice thing I'll point out is the blue paint on the axle bearing caps on some of these new models. I'm glad they didn't do it with every model, since not every prototype car has blue bearing caps, but this is a cool feature to add to freight cars that you mostly see from the more high-end manufacturers like Athearn Genesis and Scale Trains, as well as BLMA and Exact Rail back when they were still around. Now, we're going to take a look at how well these cars roll. For this section, I will only be rolling the cars from the latest release, so only the cars on the first 3 tracks. A couple disclaimers before I get started. I still don't have track power, so I can't use any locomotives for the test, and my display has a slight downhill slope to the left side, so bear that in mind when I send the cars to the left. We'll start with the first track with the UTLX and GATX cars, and I'll start by rolling them to the left all at once. Now I'll do a roll to the right. And now I'll repeat what I just did with the other 2 sets of tank cars. Up next is the TILX and SRIX cars. And now the Procore and Chevron cars. Next, we'll do a coupler shake test to see if any of these cars uncouple if they get jostled around. Here's the first pair of roads. And now the next pair. And now the final pair of tank cars. As you saw, the roll was buttery smooth in both directions for all of the cars. I had let go early on, and even though there was still a lot of weight on the right side of the track, which is where the grade levels off, the smoothness of the ride allowed the cars to come to a very gradual halt as they traveled in either direction. I am also glad to see that the coupler test yielded the expected results. Obviously there wouldn't be any major jostling during normal use, but it's always good to see the limits of the capabilities on some of the pieces of these cars to get a gauge of how long they can be expected to last before they need to be maintained. Well, this about wraps up my review of these LPG tank cars. If I had to give some final thoughts about them, it'd be that I really do like these cars a lot, and they filled a big gap with my freight car roster. I can't wait to see them make even more like them. The one downside I think is critical enough to note is that some of these cars did come with broken parts. Again, I don't know if that was a manufacturer error, a retailer error, or a shipper error, but that is something I hope will be remedied in future runs. What do you guys think of these cars? They flew off the shelves when they were released, so I know a lot of people got them. Would those of you who did say you're satisfied with your purchases? And for those of you who didn't have any yet, did I help to inform your decision to buy the few that remain in stock? Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.